continuing our studies in Genesis on Sunday nights, aren't we? We're looking at the life of Jacob. And last week we saw that bizarre and difficult story regarding the speckled and the spotted goats and the black sheep. Well, this week, my job's not much easier because we've got a monster of a chapter, 55 verses long. So as a result, I'll warn you, this sermon is going to be pretty heavy on commentary and maybe a little lighter on application than we usually are. But sometimes scriptures are like that. So when you've got big chunks of scripture like this, one of the ways we can navigate it is to think of it like a movie with different scenes. So here's a famous movie. The title of our sermon is The Great Escape. And this week, Jacob is finally going to break free from his uncle Laban. So we've got 6 scenes, and we'll work through quickly, and we'll draw our lessons where appropriate. So, scene number 1 of The Great Escape are reasons to escape. Jacob, when we reach verse 31, has been working for Laban for 20 years. The first 14 years were to pay off the bride price for his 2 wives, Leah and Rachel. And in the final 6 years, he'd been working to build up a bit of his own capital, a bit of his own wealth. But what changes? Why does Jacob finally decide that it's time to move on? Well, there are 3 reasons, and we get the 3 reasons in the first 3 verses. So, verse 1, now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained all of his wealth. Laban's sons, Jacob's cousins, are claiming foul play. They're accusing Jacob of theft, corporate frauds. How is it that his flocks are now so big? His animals don't seem to get sick, whereas the flocks of our father, well, they're languishing. His stocks are up, our stocks are down. It's not fair. Something fishy is going on, they say. So Laban's sons turn against Jacob. But verse 2, Laban turns against him as well. Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favour as before. When Laban was exploiting and conning Jacob, he quite liked having him around earlier on in life, didn't he? He probably thought Jacob was kind of a useful idiot. He's a bit gullible. Maybe he'll do anything I say. But now Jacob seems to be outsmarting him. Well, instead of greeting him with a big smile, oh, there's my favourite son-in-law, well, now Laban views him with suspicion. And the third reason, Jacob gets a divine call, doesn't he, in verse 3. The Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. God is now telling Jacob, it's time to go. Your 20 years of misery and frustration are over. But Jacob has got a bit of a problem. Now, maybe we don't really understand this problem because when we think of Laban, we maybe think of kind of Sunday school pictures. Maybe we see Laban like this. There he is on the left. And, you know, he looks like quite a nice bloke. Looks like Mark with a beard. He's a lovable rogue, isn't he? And he's harmless, but, you know, he's a bit of a con man. We maybe think of Laban in those terms. But the best way to think about Laban is not like that. It's to think about someone in the mafia. To think about the mafia in like the 30s and the 40s. Could a gangster in that scenario just leave the mob? No. If you're a mobster, well, you're owned by the mob, aren't you? You're answerable to the big boss. The big boss won't allow one of his top earners to just walk away. If you try and walk away, well, we've seen the movies, you'll get whacked, won't you? You'll end up in the East River. You'll sleep with the fishes. And all of your assets will get nicked. They'll take it all. You do not walk away from the mob. Well, you don't just walk away from Laban. He's not that kind, gentle uncle. No, he's a warlord. That's what Laban is. He probably would have looked more like that, a formidable character. You didn't get wealth and power in the ancient world unless you were willing to crack some skulls. So Jacob's got to be very careful as he prepares to leave. And he's also not sure what side his wives are on. Are they going to be loyal to him? Are they going to risk running away with him to an unknown land and an uncertain future? Or are they going to stick with what they know? After all, they're the mob boss's daughters, right? They're safe if they stay where they are, but they're at risk if they go with Jacob. So Jacob calls a secret family meeting, doesn't he? And he states his reasons for leaving in verse 4. He says, look, your father's turned against me. And for all Jacob knows, he could have him killed. I could have a little accident out in the fields, couldn't I? Besides which, your father continues to cheat me out of my wages. He's changed them 10 times. He's a mob boss. That's what the mob bosses do, don't they? They lend someone money, they say your interest rate's 50%, but a week later, well, now it's 75%. 2 weeks later, now you're only 100% back. They keep moving the goalposts. Your father's cheated me and changed my wages 10 times, says verse 7. And then Jacob explains how he's become so successful. He says that God did not permit him to harm me. If he said, the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock were spotted. And if he said, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock were striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given it to me. And now, he says, verse 13, God has warned me to get moving, because it's time to go, it's no longer safe. Now arise, go out from this land and return to the land of your kindred, your fathers. Well, there's an important lesson here, I think, when it comes to employment. Some employers are unprincipled, dishonest, and miserly, aren't they? And perhaps there's a temptation when we're faced with individuals like that to treat them like they treat us. So they're going to be nasty. Well, I'm going to cut corners then. I'm going to skive when their back is turned. After all, if they're a crook, well, surely they deserve it. But actually, Jacob teaches us that our behaviour is to be exemplary. We're to be God pleasers, not people pleasers. Remember, we saw in Ephesians, didn't we? When we serve our earthly masters, we're actually serving the Lord. We're serving Jesus. Ephesians 6 verse 7. Render service with a good will as to the Lord and not to man, knowing that whatever good anyone does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether he's slave or free. All right, back to our text then. We're on a knife edge. We're wondering, are the girls, Rachel and Leah, going to grass Jacob up? Are they going to go and tell their dad everything? Or are they in on the great escape? Or verse 14. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. Laban is a selfish, seemingly uncaring father, isn't he? And now his daughters have had enough. Jacob is now well off. God has blessed him. If they stay with their own father, well, they'll receive nothing. So they're on board. It's like, no, God's given you this. God's given us this. So the girls are in on it. Okay, scene 2. The retreat, verse 17 to 22 or 21. Not sure. So, verse 17. Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all his property that he gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Padan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. So he gets all his gear and he makes a run for it. But, like any good movie, there's a plot twist, isn't there? There's an event that's going to build tension. Verse 19. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. So you can picture it, can't you? Rachel checks that no one's looking, and then she quickly uses a key she's stolen. She lets herself in to her father's room. And there in the corner is a shrine, his little shrine. She creeps over, she's having a look over her shoulder, make sure none of the servants are around. And she grabs a couple of his idols and she shoves them in her bag. No one's seen. And she tiptoes out. Verse 20, and Jacob tricked Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he intended to flee. Now there's a play on words in verse 20. It doesn't quite translate well into English. So Rachel has stolen some idols away. She's stolen them away. And now it says, well, Jacob has stolen away. But it's not a moral judgment. This is important. It's not a moral judgment from the author. He's not telling us that we should judge Jacob for his actions. In fact, Jacob is acting in obedience to God, isn't he? He's outmaneuvered Laban. That's where the trickery comes in. Verse 21, he fled with all that he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face towards the hill country of Gilead. This is where Jacob goes. So he starts off in Haran. There it is. And he heads round, this is the Fertile Crescent in Greek, so he heads kind of round that way into Israel from Syria. And he comes east of Jordan, east of Eden, right? We've seen that before in Genesis, right? Okay, so that's where they head, that's where they stop. It's 300 miles from Haran to that position in Israel. Point number 3 then, the rage, verse 22 to 25. Laban has been with his men, shearing his sheep and his goats, and usually that would happen at around March, April time. And it would take ages, obviously, to hand shear all of those sheep. Today they do it with machinery, don't take that long, but in those days it was a long process. So Laban's been out with his men, with his boys, camping in the fields, and on the 3rd day someone from his home finally finds him. There were no mobile phones, so he's got a messenger, and his messenger has to go and look in all the fields. Where is Laban? What field is he in this week? On the 3rd day he's found. Verse 23, it's clear that Laban is angry. He's the one who's been conning his son-in-law, taking advantage of him, stealing from his daughters. He's been the arch deceiver, the schemer, but now the tables have turned. Someone has stolen his household gods, and Jacob and his daughters have out-schemed him. He abandons his sheep shearing and he gathers his men, he gathers a posse, a little army. And it's clear that Laban's intentions at this point are evil. In fact, he admits in verse 29 that he wants to do Jacob harm. But look, the Lord, Yahweh, has got Jacob's back, hasn't he? Verse 24. God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Laban, you were thinking of saying bad stuff to Jacob. You were thinking of threatening him, weren't you? Saying, I'm going to do you in unless you return. Well, you better not do that. Maybe you thought you'd try and convince him to return to you by using charm. You've done that in the past, buttering him up a bit. Maybe you'll offer him a better deal. You'll say good things to him. Well, you're not going to do that either. God has got Jacob's back. Well, we'll find out when we get to heaven just how well God protected us while we were here on earth. There are things happening in the spiritual realm that we're not privy to. In fact, we touched on this morning, didn't we? We are attended to by angels, just like Jesus was. God has got our backs. So here's a hypothetical example. There we were walking through Catford late at night, and there was a gang of youths, or maybe a local lunatic, and their intention was to do us harm, maybe rob us. But little did we know that God whispered in their ear, no, not that one. You cannot touch him or her because they belong to me. Perhaps there was a lorry driver on the road for 13 hours straight. He hadn't had a rest. And he was in two minds whether to pull in at the next service station. If he doesn't, well, he's going to fall asleep at the wheel, he's going to plough into your car and wipe your family out. But suddenly, an angel makes him feel a little bit peckish. He thinks, I could kill a KFC bargain bucket. So he pulls in and he demolishes a bargain bucket instead of demolishing your car. Don't underestimate what God is doing in the background to protect his people. Both physically and spiritually, God has got our backs. Okay, scene 4, the rubbish. In verse 25, Laban has caught up with Jacob, and now he's blocking his path. He's blocking his path, he can't go forward, so there has to be a showdown. And in true form, Laban is completely deceitful when it comes, when he confronts Jacob. And he's like a classic pantomime villain. He now tries to portray himself as a victim. So let's pull apart what he says. Verse 26, Laban said to Jacob, what have you done, that you've tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword? Well, first of all, this man had no affection for his daughters whatsoever, did he? He'd used them simply to enslave Jacob, to make a quick buck from, or not just a quick buck, a slow buck out of Jacob. Jacob's worked 14 years for him. And both of his girls had said, we're strangers to him. He doesn't come round and visit, he doesn't check up on us. This man treats us like we're not even his girls. And of course, Jacob hadn't kidnapped them, they'd gone willingly. Verse 27, he carries on, why did you flee secretly and trick me, and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs and tambourine and lyre? If you told me, Laban says, well, I could have thrown you a lovely leaving do, a huge feast. I could have sent you away with my blessing. Well, really, Laban, your sons have been accusing Jacob of stealing their inheritance. Well, where have they got that idea from? They've picked up that idea from their father, haven't they? And there's no way Laban simply would have allowed Jacob to leave. In fact, look at verse 43, because Laban is actually honest later on. Verse 43, here's how he really sees things. The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you have is mine, all that you see is mine. He's basically saying to Jacob, I own you. You don't deserve any of this stuff. It's all mine. Back to verse 28 though. Why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you've done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm. As I said, Laban's not a nice bloke. He's a vicious, dangerous warlord. But he says, your God spoke to me last night, so I can't lay a finger on you. But now look at verse 30. And now you've gone away because you longed greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Well, what we've got here is a scene, in this scene, is a tale of gods, a tale of the gods. We've got Jacob's God, and we've got Laban's gods. So we've got Jacob's God. Jacob's God is the powerful creator God. Yahweh, the God who is. If we were to ask how old is Yahweh, how long has he been around? Well, he has no birth, he has no start. He's from everlasting to everlasting. Where does Yahweh live? Well, Yahweh just is. I can't point over there and say that's where Yahweh hangs out. No, he just is. He's as much here as he is there. He can speak to Jacob at Bethel, and he can communicate with Laban in Gilead. Yahweh God can change the colour of the sheep and the goats in Jacob's flock. Jacob's God can steal offspring from Laban's sons and give them to his own son, Jacob. Jacob's God can get a mob boss like Laban to rethink his action. He can come to him in a dream and terrify him. So So we've got Yahweh, but on the other hand, we've got Laban's gods. Laban's got plural gods. He needs more than one. Perhaps he's got 2, 3 or 4 different deities that he worships. We know from the previous chapter that Laban likes a bit of witchcraft, a bit of divination. And these are the gods that he goes to for answers. Well, how old are Laban's gods? Well, all you've got to do to find out is turn over one of the statues and there's a little hallmark on there. One of them's 20 odd years old, one of them's a bit older, 30 odd years old. Where do his gods live? Well, his gods live in his front room, don't they? Do Laban's gods instill fear and dread in the hearts of their enemies? Well, no. Rachel shoves them in her sack, doesn't she, and runs off with them. And here's the big key difference. Laban's gods can be stolen, can't they? They're powerless. You might ask, why did Rachel steal her father's idols? Well, we're not sure, and maybe discuss it later, but I think she does it out of spite. I think she wants to give the old man a metaphorical kick up the backside as she leaves. I don't think Rachel worships these gods. She might have. But if you read, she's already declared that she believes in the Lord. She's backing Jacob. She's all in with Jacob. But remember, her father has betrayed her. Because of him, she had to share her beloved Jacob. She was in love with this man. But because of Laban, well, Leah got her man first. Well, he stole my husband, so I'm going to steal his pathetic little statues. But either way, the fact is that these gods can be removed. And therefore, it exposes them for what they are. Well, there's a warning for us there, isn't there? If we're making idols of the things of this world, our idols can be stolen away, can't they? So let's think about football. That's a big idol for a lot of men. What is the most popular and widely supported football team in England? Not Arsenal, Jenny, you're too London-centric. Manchester United, yeah, maybe Liverpool was second. Think about how Man United were worshipped and idolised back in the 90s. You had the big idols, didn't you? Cristiano Ronaldo, David Beckham, Roy Keane, Ruud van Nistelrooy. And everyone loved Manchester United. Oh, they were winning it, brilliant. People would spend thousands of pounds on them. But look at Manchester United now. If you're relying on Manchester United for your joy and your happiness, for your success, your glory, well, your heart has been stolen away. These idols are stealable. They're powerless. And I'm not just picking on Manchester United fans, it's the same with all football teams. If we begin to worship men or institutions, the day will come when their glory is stolen away. I might get told off later by Wendy, but ladies, maybe you've idolised a particular item of clothing. Maybe a bag, a pair of shoes, something you want in your home, a kitchen unit, whatever it might be. That's where my happiness lies. That's what I'm looking forward to. That's where my success will be boiled down to. But of course, one broken heel, one loose buckle on your bag, or simply the passing of enough time, and our idols are stolen away. Christian friend, what God will you serve? The gods of this dying, fading world, or the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? The God who simply is. Okay, verse 31 then. Jacob explains exactly why he ran away like he did. I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. And of course, I can think, we can presume that this is what would have happened. Jacob would not have been allowed to leave with all that was rightfully his. He would either have left with nothing, or simply, he might have ended up in a shallow grave in the desert. Look at verse 32. Anyone, he says, with whom you find your God shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours, and you can take it. And this is great writing and great storytelling, isn't it? Now, Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. Jacob has declared the death sentence on anyone who's found with these gods. But little does he know that the one he loves above all else is the one he's just condemned. Now, funnily enough, we're going to see this story repeat itself later on in Genesis, aren't we? Rachel's son Benjamin is going to be found with stolen goods in his bag as he returns from Egypt. And his life is going to be under threat as a result. In fact, I don't know if you noticed, but this whole story is a precursor to what will happen even further in the future. It's a hint towards the Exodus. God's people are one day going to leave Egypt in a great hurry. And they'll be pursued by an army of bloodthirsty soldiers. But of course, just like God protects Jacob, he's going to protect them. They're not going to be harmed. All right, well, here comes the rummaging. Jacob signs the search warrant. He says, all right, go in, have a look. Go through my stuff. Anything you find that's yours, you can take. And again, let's imagine this. As Laban mentions his stolen items, or maybe Rachel's there in the background and she suddenly flushes. She swallows nervously, maybe her eyes give her away. She thinks, I didn't realise he would notice so quickly that his items are gone. And the fear rises inside of her. And now Jacob's insisted that he will execute the thief. Verse 33, so Laban went into Jacob's tent, and then he went into Leah's tent, and then he went into the tent of the two female servants, of Jacob's other wives, but he did not find them. I wonder what Rachel was doing as her father searched the other tents. Maybe she's thinking, I've got time to get the idols and throw them behind a rock, or maybe I could dig a hole and bury them. Can I re-hide them? But before she's got time to think, Laban is by her door. She's got no other option, verse 34. She just sits on them. They're in a saddlebag, so her handbag, in other words, the bag that goes on her saddle of her camel. And she just plonks herself down. Verse 34, Laban felt all about the tents, but he did not find them. And she said to her father, let not my lord be angry, that I cannot rise before you, that the way of women is upon me. So this month I'm having a really, really bad period, Father. I just can't move. Get me some paracetamol. I'm exhausted. And it works. Well, it's like father, like daughter, isn't it? Here's a woman who knows how to lie and deceive to get her own way. Well, a little reminder to us if we're parents, and it's that our children see what we do. It's always eye-opening for new parents when they begin to see their own behavioural traits displayed in their children. You think, oh, little Clive's doing that. He's doing that because I do that. We've got to be so careful as parents that we set a good example for our children. Same if you've got grandchildren. Our behaviour matters. It is imitated. Okay, scene 5. The rebuke. I love this section because you get 20 years of anger and frustration and they keep pouring out of Jacob, don't they? Verse 36, 37, Laban's not found the gods. So he says to him, you've had your grubby little paws all over my stuff and you found nothing. Everything I left with was mine. And in verse 38, we get an airing of Jacob's grievances. And it's all true, what he says. Everything he says is accurate. And I think he's probably rehearsed this little speech. We do that, don't we? We've got something like a fat chest, but if I get a chance, I'm going to say this and this and this. Good point. Well, verse 38, he lets him have it. These 20 years I've been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried. I've not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts, I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. In the ancient world, it was custom that if an animal was eaten by wild animals or stolen, the owner of the herd would bear the cost. So it's a bit like shoplifting today, right? If something is stolen from Tesco's, well, it's Tesco, the corporation, that lose out, isn't it? They don't expect the cashiers and the shelf stackers to cover the cost of the stolen goods. That's what Laban should have done, but he didn't. Any loss, he'd made Jacob cover. Verse 40, there I was by day, the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I've been in your house. I served you for 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you've changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, the fear of Isaac, had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labour of my hands, and he rebuked you last night. Jacob uses, I don't know if you spotted it, he uses a name for God that is used nowhere else in Scripture. He calls Yahweh the fear of Isaac. Isaac is his father, isn't it? So he's saying, this is the God of my father. This is the God my father feared. He's my God. He is the fear of Isaac. So he's saying this is my father's God, but he's also making a very obvious point. That God is terrifying. Why have Laban's hands been tied when it comes to Jacob? Well, it's because God came to him in a dream. As Jacob rightly points out, if Laban had had his own way, he would have stolen all of Jacob's stuff. He would have taken his daughters and his grandchildren back, and he would have sent Jacob into Canaan with nothing. But the fear of God had been placed upon Laban. So think, here's this big, tough, uncompromising mob boss, and one little dream has him changing his actions. God must have really frightened him the night before, mustn't it? Well, Proverbs 9:10 says famously, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Well, look, tonight, do you fear the God of the Bible? You can go to a lot of churches these days and they'll present just one side of God. So they'll say God's a God of love, he's your father, he's generous, he's forgiving. And that's all true, isn't it? It's wonderfully true. Praise God that it is. But one thing we must never overlook is that God is terrifying. I wonder, what do you think is God's outstanding feature? If you had to sum up God in one word, what word would it be? Wake you up there. Holy. Well done, Margaret. In fact, Isaiah tells us, doesn't he, that God is holy, holy, holy. He's 3 times holy. Holy, as we know, means set apart. He's nothing like us. He's 3 times not like us. He's that holy. God is like a nuclear reactor. You've seen on TV or in films when people are working at nuclear power plants, well, they stick on all of that protective equipment, don't they? Got breathing apparatus, big rubber suits. Why? Because the reactor is so powerful. It's dangerous. You don't just wander into the core of a nuclear reactor. You'll die. Well, that's the same with God. He is awesome in his holiness, in his purity, in his power. In him is no darkness at all. He's so bright. Like when you look at the sun, you have to cover your eyes, don't you? And therefore, in our natural state, we have no right to get anywhere near God. Because we're evidently not holy. We are flawed, broken, sinful people. Now, when you realise that you're at odds with an awesome, powerful, 3 times holy God, well, it's that knowledge that drives you to look for an answer. It drives you to look for a resolution. How can we who are unholy get to know this holy being? How can we become holy like him? Well, it's the fear of God then that drives us towards Jesus. It drives us towards the answer that we're given on the cross. It drives us towards God's Son. And it's God's Son who promises to cleanse us. He will make us holy. He will put new life in us if only we put our faith in him. Okay, final scene then. Scene 6. Release and return, verse 43 to the end. We'll talk about an absolute villain. Look how defiant Laban is, verse 43. Laban answered and said to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, your children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. So he's still claiming ownership of Jacob's property. But then he says, what can I do this day for these my daughters or for their children whom they've borne? In other words, my hands are tied. They want to go with you, and Yahweh has warned me against taking any further action. So what do? Well, Jacob and Laban enter an uneasy truce. They enter a covenant. They set up stones, witness stones. This is a boundary they make, a boundary that will divide Laban's descendants, the Arameans, from Jacob's descendants, the Israelites. And look how slimy Laban is. He tries to make out like he's got the moral high ground. Notice what he says in verse 52. This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me to do harm. So Jacob, you're the threat, you're the real threat. I'm worried that you're going to cross this boundary later on and you're going to harm me. Verse 53, the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. Of course, the truth is that God has already judged between them. And Jacob has been found righteous. Jacob was a changed man. 20 years had moulded him into an honest, hard-working husband and father. And God had stripped Laban of his wealth and handed it over to Jacob. End of verse 53, Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. And Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. Early in the morning, Laban arose, kissed his grandchildren and his daughters, and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned home. All right, to close this evening then, we need to consider Laban. This is the last time we hear about Laban in the Bible. And he's a tragic figure, I think. He's so close to getting to know the true God. See, there's a difference between believing in God and knowing God, isn't there? Laban believes that a God called Yahweh exists, doesn't he? He's scared of Yahweh. The Lord speaks to him in a dream, and it stops Laban doing what he wants to do. So what stops Laban from getting to know Yahweh? Why does Laban not think, well, this God should be my God? Well, two things. Number one, to him, the Lord is just another God. Laban's got his own God, and he sees Jacob's God as on a par with his. Yahweh is just another statue on his mantelpiece. He's got his shrine. Well, he can put a little Yahweh statue next to his other statues. Laban fails to see the supremacy of the Lord. He fails to recognise who Yahweh actually is. He is the creator of the whole universe. He's the very God who gave Laban a body. He's the very God who gave Laban breath to breathe every morning. He's the judge who Laban will one day stand before and have to answer to. And secondly, Laban was far more interested in the gifts than he was in the giver. Remember what Laban admitted last chapter 30, verse 27. He said, I've learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you, Jacob. Laban lived next door to a Christian family, didn't he? Jacob was a believer. And we've seen he wasn't a perfect believer by any stretch. But he was a man who was faithful. Jacob was a man who actually had a relationship with the Lord. And Laban saw the benefits of that relationship. He liked having Jacob around. He was blessed because of Jacob's character. He was blessed because Jacob was kind, he was diligent, he was hardworking. Laban got extra stuff because of his relationship with Jacob. But it still didn't move Laban to start worshipping the Lord. Laban was only interested in the Lord for what God could give him materially. Well, look, is that you this evening? Maybe like Laban, you would say, yeah, I believe in God. You believe in God's Son to some extent. You believe that there was a man named Jesus who died, and perhaps maybe you're even willing to admit that Jesus rose again. And you like being near Christians. You can see that being a Christian brings with it many blessings. And it moulds people into good characters. The Christians you know are good people. And maybe you enjoy spending time with those good people. But like Laban, you won't take that final step. You won't elevate God to his rightful position in your life. You won't move him from the mantelpiece to the throne. Well, look, tonight, learn the lesson from Laban. He got so close to heaven, but he missed it by so much. He was so near, yet so far. He was threatened by God, but he didn't fear God. He believed in God, but he didn't know God. He loved the blessings, but he wouldn't embrace the one from whom all blessings flow. So tonight, don't be a Laban. Grab hold of the one who can make you holy. Fear him, love him, and know him by going to his Son, Jesus Christ.